We want to be known as world champions, and we're gonna work at that or die, and we're gonna do it or die trying. A lot has changed since I was in the NFL. The thing I'm pretty sure hasn't changed is you got to win. So that's what we're attacking.
The Los Angeles Chargers have felt like a team with no direction the past few years. With this offseason, the organization made one of the biggest moves for the franchise in recent memory, and quite frankly, it was long overdue. John Spanos took over the operations of the team in 2013 and has hired 3 coaches up until this point: Mike McCoy, Anthony Lynn, and Brandon Staley. All 3 of them didn't have any head coach experience prior to joining the Chargers, and each of their tenures ended in their own disaster. Past decade, the overall image of the Chargers ownership group has shifted largely due to some of these organizational moves. The Spanos family has often been labeled as cheap and not willing to do whatever it takes to win, but they finally, at least for the time being, have quieted everyone. And the turning point for that really happened in the middle of the season this past year when they got embarrassed 63-21 against the Las Vegas Raiders, and probably the most embarrassing loss in team history. It was clear to everybody watching, whether you were a diehard Chargers fan or a casual football fan, that the team quit. It was honestly the most obvious quit job on a coach I have ever seen in all my years watching football, and it didn't take long for the Spanos family to fire both head coach Brandon Staley and longtime general manager Tom Telesco, as they were both gone by the following morning. But I personally feel like the writing was on the wall way before this point. I personally go back to the 2022 playoffs when they had a 27-0 lead against the Jacksonville Jaguars and ended up losing that game. I felt like after that choke job, just about every Chargers fan and every media member was calling for Staley's head. But as John Spanos said a couple months ago in a press conference, he felt like the trajectory of the team was still pointing up, which is ultimately the reason why he decided to bring Staley back. But he was clearly wrong, and for a fan base who going into the season was already wary of the ceiling of the team, for it to play out the way that it did, it felt like almost a wasted season. But the Spanos promised to do something different this time instead of hiring a first-year head coach, and you could tell that early on by the candidates they brought in for the job: Raheem Morris, Dan Quinn, Mike Vrabel, Leslie Frazier, and of course the man who ended up getting the job, Jim Harbaugh. To work with him, they also brought in Joe Ortiz to be their new general manager, and I'm actually intrigued with the hire. He's been a part of the Ravens organization the past 26 seasons, working his way up the ranks, and he's finally getting his opportunity to run the show. I personally believe the best way to hire a good GM is to poach executives from well-run organizations, and Ortiz checks all of those boxes. But I still believe that Harbaugh is going to be the lead man behind this rebuild, and I don't think that you can find much better in terms of a culture setter and team builder. Everywhere Jim Harbaugh has gone in his career, he has rebuilt the team into a top-tier league. No matter if it was with the University of San Diego, getting them to 11-1 and winning the 2005 Pioneer Football League Championship in his second season, or even Stanford after a few seasons, bringing them to an 11-1 record and winning the Orange Bowl, or going to the NFL and reaching 3 straight NFC Championship games, including a Super Bowl appearance in 2012 with the San Francisco 49ers, and his most recent stop, winning a national championship for the University of Michigan and getting them back to prominence in college football. No matter the league, conference, or team that he's been a part of, Harbaugh has brought every single one to some sort of high-level success, but I would argue with the expectations he's under now with all of his previous rebuildings, this is going to be the toughest one to navigate for him. The Chargers have not won the AFC West title since 2009. They only have 2 playoff wins in the past decade, and no coach for the team has earned 3 consecutive winning seasons since Marty Schottenheimer in the early 2000s. You add in the fact that the Kansas City Chiefs, led by Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, is in the division, along with another Super Bowl winning head coach in Sean Payton. But I do believe if there was anyone the Chargers were going to hire this head coaching cycle to bring the Chargers franchise back to being somewhat relevant, it was Jim Harbaugh. So shout out to the Spanos family for finally being willing to push all their chips into the middle of the table and going all in to find success. But now looking towards this offseason and what the plan should be in terms of roster construction, the Chargers are going to have some very fascinating decisions to make. They currently sit $44 million over the cap, might be looking to move on from some high-priced veterans. The biggest cap hit on the team currently is pass rusher Khalil Mack, who funny enough had the best season of his career this past year with 17 sacks. But at the age of 32 with a cap hit of $38.5 million, I don't know how the Chargers let him play on that contract. And if somehow they do, I think that does mean Joey Bosa gets traded, because he is also due for $36.6 million against the cap. And I don't see how you enter a season with 30% of your team's total cap space going to 2 edge rushers, and one specifically in Bosa, who hasn't been able able to stay healthy in recent seasons. But then on the offensive side of the ball, you have a similar issue with your wide receivers. Keenan Allen is counting $34.7 million against the cap, but also just had one of the best seasons of his career as well. But he's also 32 years old heading into next season. So it begs the question if this regime will also be willing to pay him that much money. And on the other side of the field is Mike Williams. And hey, if they do decide they want to bring back Keenan Allen, then Mike Williams becomes expendable. He's also counting $32.4 million against the cap, but suffered a torn ACL in the middle of last year. So personally, I don't see how all four of these players remain on the Chargers roster come the end of March. I think it's likely that at least two of these guys will be in new uniforms come the start of next season. And the last two veterans I could see being cap casualties is linebacker Eric Kendricks and center Corey Linsley, who may end up retiring anyway. But they're two guys who are a little bit past their prime and are well overpaid at this point of their career. So after some of those moves are inevitably made and a few restructures are done, the Chargers will be out of a cap hole, but they still won't have a ton of money to spend this free agency. So cheap veterans or young players off injuries will probably be the bulk of the moves for Los Angeles in March. So April is really where this rebuild will begin to take place, and the Chargers have a fairly nice top pick to help jumpstart it. They hold the number 5 selection in the 2024 NFL draft, and will be able to get a prospect who will be a stud and ready to help in year number 1. I think there's really only 3 options for this selection: Brock Bowers, Malik Neighbors, or Joe Alt. The best tight end, the second best wide receiver, or the best offensive lineman on the board. It ultimately comes down to fit and what aspect of the team Harbaugh wants to build first. Personally, I would select Brock Bowers out of Georgia. He's a generational tight end prospect. He's fantastic after the catch. He can get in line and block. And for a new offensive coordinator, Greg Roman, whose system is built around the running game and tight ends, this pick makes the most sense for me. Most Charger fans that I've seen want Malik Neighbors, a super explosive wide receiver, to pair with Keenan Allen. But at the end of the day, it comes down to wanting to use this pick to support quarterback Justin Herbert. But outside of their top 5 pick, the Chargers will also have 2 more selections inside the top 70 to inject the roster with more top-end young talent. But this offseason seems more like a teardown to me than it does a build-up year. And I know the expectations are super high regardless of it being the first year of this new regime, but I'm someone who's trying to preach patience and that I don't expect this Chargers team to be a true contender in 2024. But in due time, as we've seen throughout the career of Jim Harbaugh, he's going to get this train on the tracks, and when he does, it's going to be scary for the rest of the league. And somebody who can speed up the process of this rebuild is Justin Herbert, and Harbaugh really hasn't had a quarterback like this since Andrew Luck back at Stanford. In the first 4 years of his NFL career, Herbert has become one of the most polarizing players in the National Football League. You have some people who think he's a bona fide top 5 quarterback, while others think he's severely overhyped. I find myself somewhere in the middle. I believe talent-wise, the only people you can argue that has more talent than Herbert is Mahomes, Allen, and Lamar. I mean, just in terms of his arm strength, his ability to move, and his size, he's a super gifted player. However, I'm also aware of the lack of success in the postseason or carrying his team at times, and some of that criticism is warranted. But overall, you can't deny that Herbert is an amazing talent that just needs a little refining, and I believe that Harbaugh will be able to get that out of him. I think the first step in accomplishing that is just by creating a better support system. Harbaugh's offenses rely heavily on the running game and play action, and that bodes well for any quarterback, and I think Justin Herbert will benefit from that this season. I saw some people on social media say this, and I agree. Herbert is about to get more credit for doing less. What that really means is, although Herbert won't likely have the 5,000-yard, 38 touchdown season like he did in 2021, he will be more efficient and lead his team to more victories, which ultimately is the only thing that matters. But I'm excited to see how Justin Herbert grows next year and really the evolution of his game and how this new Chargers organization really builds around him in the coming years. Now I want to know what you think about the Los Angeles Chargers and the hiring of Jim Harbaugh. Do you agree with me and think he'll be able to get the team back on track and become a legit contender in the AFC? Or do you think this rebuild is going to go poorly and they won't achieve the success that they're looking for? But subscribe to the channel if you are new, drop a like on the video if you did enjoy it, and as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in my next one.